Firefighters of Reddit, what's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? I was a volunteer firefighter many years back. One summer, after a long period of no rain, two good old boys decide to have a few dozen beers and take their Jeep into a nearby field to go off-roading. Well, two featuring tall corn stalks that are bone dry wind up getting jammed up into the undercarriage, which, on a 90+ degree day, turns out to be hot enough to ignite a fire. The owner of the field sees the situation unfolding from their house and calls for fire and police. Given the proximity to my location, I go directly to the scene after hearing the page go out and see these two buttholes trying to drive the Jeep faster and faster to put the fire out. Eventually, the engine gives out, but they won't leave the car. I physically had to reach in, burning my arms in the process, since I didn't respond to the station first to get my turnout gear, and pull them out. Somehow, they decided that remaining in the car would slow down the flames. And because they thought it was a good idea to continue driving a burning vehicle around a dry field, we now have a significant brush fire and have to call mutual aid from another county to help douse the fire. State police get involved, I have a nice trip to the hospital, and buttholes lose their Jeep and the remainder of their booze. Obligatory, not a fireman, but they were most definitely involved. I used to work in a NYC public grammar school over the summers to pay for college back in the 90s. One of the full-time employees was a nice guy but stupid. And I don't mean he was slow or anything. He just did dumb crap because he was careless. One time he loaded up a trailer with like 25 gallons of gas and was driving it back through the main school parking lot. He didn't realize that container cracked open and spilled all 25 gallons in the parking lot. He didn't want to get in trouble, so he thought the best way to get rid of the evidence was to set the gas on fire. He didn't realize that burning gas gives off a lot of black smoke, and a gigantic cloud of black smoke coming from a school generally attracts a lot of attention from first responders. Panicking, he tries to put the flaming lake of gas out by driving over it with his car. The fire department gets there, screaming at him to stop driving his car through flaming gasoline. They finally get the fire out and just screamed at this guy for like 25 minutes. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. I was the dumb call. My cat got her paw stuck under the dishwasher and was screaming bloody murder. I couldn't move her paw and I couldn't lift the machine. So I sat with her while my husband called the fire department. She chewed right through one of my favorite blankets in her stress. Firefighters arrive, not in full suits but heavy boots and pants. Soon as they came around the corner to the kitchen, our cat miraculously was able to free her paw and take off to hide in the bathroom. The guys seemed confused, but at least it was easy. We thanked them profusely for being scary enough to free our cat, who had zero physical damage, not even a broken claw. I guess she'd hooked her claws on something and didn't want to let it go for love or money. Not me, but dad was a firefighter in NYC and once responded to a call at a Chinese food restaurant where the owner's walkway was iced over. He apparently didn't speak very good English and maybe misunderstood the job of a fireman. Genuinely don't know. They salted down his front walkway for him and explained that this was 100% not their job. They all had a good laugh and the guy gave them all free egg rolls. PPL always used to ask him questions about crazy calls and he never enjoyed talking about that, so he would always tell that story. Happened in 1999, still makes me laugh to this day 20 years later. ETA, if you plan on commenting something along the lines of 20 years ago, ZOMG, I'm old. Screw you for reminding me. I assure you roughly 40 other people have already beaten you to the punch. I get it. 99 doesn't feel that long ago. Let's all move on, LOL. It's interesting that that's what so many people took away from this story. Obligatory, not a firefighter, but recently in San Diego a group of suburban moms decided to take their infants up the local hiking spot called Cowles Mountain. It's not a particularly grueling hike as many children and elderly people can do it. However, there is a heat stroke warning posted at the trailhead. Not to mention it can get pretty hot here, and this last week was no exception with temperatures exceeding 90 degrees. Well, these idiots took their infants up in this heat. The trail is pretty exposed, and due to its easy accessibility and Instagram worthiness, lots of inexperienced hikers flock to it, many times with little to no water because they underestimated how hot and difficult it could be. Needless to say, the fire department Ems and Chopper were all called as these moms had taken their babies up and were too tired and exhausted to come down. They had to go up and give water, check their conditions, and some even carried the babies down. I know fires are a lot hotter, but I bet they were cursing out these moms in their heads as they had to hike up the mountain in pretty much full gear. The moms came strolling down laughing and flipping off the cameras as they were angry people were going to see their stupidity. This happened all because they wanted to take a group photo with their infants on a mountain on a hot day. 2 kids and 2 infants. I was on a backpacking trip through some national parks a couple years ago, and we were repeatedly shocked by how little water most people were carrying. Like you're in the middle of the fricking desert and we'd see people with no pack just holding a 20-ounce bottle of water. Meanwhile, I've got 3L in my pack and an extra 750 milliliters bottle just in case. Fire department and the paramedics had to come to my work one day because some kid didn't know the difference between a swimming pool and a splash pad. There's this artificial waterfall that goes down into a basin that's only about 2 inches deep where there's fountains and stuff for kids to play in. This kid decided to climb up the waterfall. There are multiple signs posted not to do this, and decided to dive off into the water below that again is only 2 inches deep. Luckily the kid landed flat on his face, so he survived and avoided being paralyzed, but he was knocked out cold immediately and would have probably drowned, but luckily his mother heard the splat and came running over screaming and pulled him out. And for my next trick, I shall dive from the roof onto this damp sponge. Not a firefighter, but EMT. Also my friend's story. Dude was spending some alone time and wanted to stimulate himself. I guess he didn't have a traditional dialed, so he used the handle end of a whisk. The problem was that the whisk had a ball on the very end of it. Handle was a normal cylinder tube with a ball on the very end. Went in just fine, but he couldn't pull it out himself. Apparently when they got the call he didn't tell them what was going on, just that he had got something stuck. They got there to see a whisk hanging out his butt. Apparently the whole thing just made everyone laugh, but the poor dude was freaking out and in pain from trying to pull it out. He also apparently tried to give it a few good tugs, which probably didn't help. Took him to the hospital where they gave him relaxer and lubed him up. Austin, TX, Heb, circa 1990. A little girl needs to use the toilet. She locks the door, manages to get onto the toilet and use it all by herself. She's a big girl after all, but the toilet is tall and getting down is scary. Better wait for mom to come help. Except, she can't get in because the little idiot locked the door and is too scared of the 5 inches from her feet to the floor, and so just sits there crying while sitting on the toilet. The firemen break down the door and the little girl is saved. God dang, I was a stupid kid. Edit. Who boy, this blew up. I'll try to answer questions I was asked and provide clarification so y'all can stop asking. I was really little, guys. Like 3, maybe 4. This was a single-use bathroom, not the one with stalls. So when I locked it, it was an actual door. I don't recall which specific Heb, but probably Riverside or 7th Saint. Why didn't they use a key or unscrew the door? Good question. Not something I asked at the time, of course, but when I was older I thought the same things and shrugged it off as someone had to have tried that. It wasn't possible for one reason or another, so they called the firemen. The plot twist though. Not a firefighter, but my uncle used to be one. He told me a story about a person he was training to become a firefighter. Said person didn't follow protocol regarding belts that they had to fasten around their bodies. When the person was performing a drill that involved getting suspended in air, a loose part of the belt caught his testicle as he was midair with all his weight crushing it. My uncle got him out of there and he had to go to the hospital. As a trades person who occasionally wears a full arrest harness, this is one of my worst nightmares, and I make sure to spend all the time I need adjusting and shifting my harness around to make sure the boys are safe if I do fall. Costco company policy now requires that all safes, cabinets etc be locked closed on the display floor because of this little genius in my hometown who locked himself in. None of the employees had the key or combination, and apparently 911 is faster than a locksmith. We cut the hinges off with a circular saw, scared the crap out of the kid, but he was fine. It was Saturday, so we snagged a few free samples on the way out. All in all, a good day. We rescued another kid out of a stuffed animal game at the fair once too. The kid climbed up through the trapdoor trying to reach the toys and got stuck. That was a fun one too. I was a volunteer with a rural department in the foothills of Appalachia, in a very small college town. Like, roughly 1,500 students and about 500 locals. Every year we had drunk students fall off the side of the relatively gentle sloping mountains around campus. These falls were rarely fatal or even likely to cause serious injury. One of the frats had a big formal and we got the call that someone had wandered off from the party and couldn't be found. This is just before cell phones started to be everywhere, and cell phones didn't work very well around campus anyway. Turns out it is a guy in my class who I know pretty well. We go out in the woods looking for him, and hear groaning down the side of one of the drop-offs. Not a far drop, about 15 feet, but sheer sides and no way to walk out. I personally have climbed down this little gully before and climbed back out. It is not difficult, but this guy can't get it together and has no idea where he is. So we have to get the high-angle rescue truck to drive out there with all our ropes and the backboard and other crap. Then we have to get all rigged up, using the appropriate anchors and systems that we were required to use in any high-angle rescue situation. Then we have to drop down there and try to backboard this drunk butthole. The whole freaking time he fought us on it. I'm sitting there trying to explain, hey man, it's me, your buddy, you know me, let me help you. Freaking guy kept lurching away from us, taking swings, and rolling off the board whenever we finally got him on it. It took half of the small, undermanned fire department all goddamn night to get him out. Like, he literally had time to sober up enough to become cooperative. I suppose that's not much of a story, but it's funny because I still give him crap about it to this day whenever I see him. Just an incredibly frustrating, needlessly difficult situation. Not a firefighter, but former paramedic. Ironic that my best story for this is not one from in the field, but is from the air. I was working a shift in a busy trauma center because I was an instructor for a paramedic program, and I had paramedic students doing clinical rotations through the air. A patient came in with a weight from a weight set stuck to his dong. He had tried to have conjugal relations with the center of a weight that you would put on a barbell. I hope I'm using the right term, but probably not. The fit was such that arterial pressure allowed fluid to enter to the end of the dong, but the lower pressure venous return meant that blood stayed trapped in the dong, creating a dong balloon and also a dong that wasn't going to be separated from the weight anytime soon. I don't remember how heavy the weight was, I only remember it was big and red. Insert "that's what he said" joke here. So the guy shows up in the air on his own, but before surgery is undertaken, the doc wanted to see if the fire depth could cut through the weight with some of its heavy rescue equipment used to cut people out of wrecked cars. So 911 was called. I don't know much about those weights, but I guess they're made of cement sometimes, and none of the hydraulic equipment the fire department tried could cut off the weight. One of my friends was on the crew that responded and I got to hear all about it, as we were all ushered out of the room during the actual cutting attempt. So attempts to cut fail, and we prep the guy for emergency surgery. I'm sure with a urologist, but it was over 20 years ago, so I don't remember for sure. I do know that the surgeon told the doc that the man would probably be impotent for life. When dongs get stuck in things that cannot be removed, they have to cut splits into the dong to relieve the pressure by draining the trapped fluid. This may or may not leave the person with permanent impotence, but in this case it was pretty certain that would be the result. TLDR. Don't stick your dong in things that are solid and could trap it. You may be risking impotence for life. My friend's former roommate was a firefighter. I describe him like this, and not as my friend because he's actually a total dong, but he's still a firefighter, so he saves lives. Anyway, I was over at their place one day, and firefighter Dave, not his real name, comes home looking exhausted. We could smell the smoke on him, so we knew he had seen some action that day. We asked him about it and he just got this really sad but humid look in his eye. An Instagram model has set her apartment building on fire by filling her room with candles for some photo shoot where she would pretend to be doing yoga in the middle of hundreds of candles. But she saw a spider sitting on one of the lit candles, so she sprayed some Raid at it. The room pretty much ignited extremely quickly and In her fear, she threw the bottle of Raid at the fire and then hid in her shower across the hall. She was still in the apartment when Dave kicked in the door and carried her out. Her apartment engulfed in flames. She was close to passing out from smoke inhalation, so Dave had to cradle her in his arms. As he carries her to the window to be lowered on a ladder, she says wait. Dave stops, thinking she is about to tell him about someone else that needs rescuing. She meekly lifts her phone and snaps a selfie, making the duck face and everything. Flames in the background. Apparently by the time he left, the Instagram model had posted the photo to her profile and it was already getting tons of likes. From what I hear, though, she did kill the spider, so technically she wasn't a total moron. I mean, we joke about burning the house down to kill a spider, but this be. Not me, but my dad was a firefighter and he told me this story once. He was serving on his volunteer fire department up in Canada, and they got a call about a burning car in a small neighborhood. They rushed out to the location, and there was a man, drunk off his butt, sitting in the driver's seat of a crashed pickup truck on the side of a small road, while the truck's hood is on fire. As they pulled the man out of the driver's side of the truck, he kept yelling at them that his beer, which was in the back seat, was getting warm. My dad says that this story makes him sad to think about, but I still think it's at least somewhat funny. I remember a story about this kid that decided it would be a fun game to go hide before bedtime and lock himself in his parents' bedroom. After his parents noticed he wasn't brushing his teeth like he should be after putting on his pajamas, they further noticed that their bedroom door was locked. After some knocking and giggling, they figured out what was going on. All was okay. Fun and games was now over and it was time for bed. It was then discovered by the kid when unlocking the door that by some terrible odds, the key had jammed itself into the keyway and wouldn't turn to unlock. After a few seconds of struggling, panic set in and the waterworks came. The parents also couldn't open the door despite their best efforts, even going as far as disassembling the lock as much as possible from the hallway. Eventually, after much frustration, the father, who was an off-duty firefighter, had to drive all the way into the station on his day off to borrow the hand-pumped hydraulic door popper. Eventually he got back and managed to force the door open without too much damage to it or the frame. He saved the day once again, all on his day off. The problem was eventually discovered to be that the kid used some random key he found that wasn't even meant for the type of lock on the door. So how he managed to lock it with little to no effort is still a complete mystery to this very day. My family often reminds me of this story. Sorry again, Dad. Once got called out to a fully involved 2-story residential structure fire. The fire had probably had time to consume the building for an hour or two before anyone noticed. Residents weren't home, no nearby neighbors. The place was so hot, you could feel your skin starting to crisp up underneath your turnout gear 30 feet away. Obvious surround and drown operation. No way were we saving any part of this building. Homeowner comes up to me screaming and crying while I'm on the nozzle that we have to go inside to save her 4 dogs. I didn't know how to tell her that if I couldn't get close to the house in fireproof pants, there was not a snowball's chance her dogs trapped inside were still alive. All told, it took about 7 hours to put the fire out, and another 2 to finish overhaul and packing up our gear. The entire building was gone, nothing but a few burnt out support beams left. Comes out later that she was illegally renting the place out like a tenement house to a bunch of day laborers and their families and had gotten someone to do unlicensed electrical work inside, which started the fire. It's a wonder no humans were hurt. But I think about that fire and that woman's total disregard for safety or the well-being of her tenants a lot. Spend a few bucks and hire a licensed union electrician. Multiple families lost everything they owned that day because some cheap butt landlord took shortcuts where she shouldn't have. Bonus story: once rescued a fully grown woman who had somehow managed to wedge herself under a school bus seat and couldn't get out. Had to cut the whole seat off with a sawzall. Bus driver was none too pleased. Not really saving a person, but like 2 weeks ago we got a call for a field fire with multiple structures in danger. It was only 6 minutes from my house, so I went POV personal vehicle. Got there and the 911 caller was pacing back and forth, and the 2 fires were about 3 inches high and about 2 inches wide each. Really small fires. Structures supposedly in danger were down the road and you couldn't see them. When the fire was actually spreading, and this was before we got there. It only burned about 10 feet long and 4 foot wide of dry grass. We just stared at it until it went out, which didn't take long. Then our truck finally arrived and the guys were really upset that we got called to something you could have looked at wrong and it would go out. They soaked the ground that was burned and a little around it so whoever threw their cig in the grass doesn't set more grass on fire. Here are some in no particular order. 1. Had one lady try to drive through the middle of Waffle House at lunchtime. We explained that it, in fact, wasn't a drive-through. 6 months later we ran the same call, on the same woman, at the same Waffle House. 2. My buddy at the same department ran a house fire where a man with psychiatric problems set fire to himself and locked himself in the bedroom. The fireman made a push into the house and found him sitting on his bed furiously masturbating. They dragged him out, still beating his meat, and threw him in the ambulance. Dude was jacking off non-stop in the ambulance and at the hospital a few miles away. I'm not sure what happened after he was dropped off, but I'm assuming it was a race between him finishing himself off or the meds knocking him out. Not really sure which one. I am hoping for more. 3. Had one lady drive her dirt bike off a 15-foot embankment when she was high as a kite. She seemed okay for the most part but freaked out when I asked, like a smartass, is your arm normally like that? And it was shaped like a lightning bolt. 4. Our station had to extricate a guy's scrotum out of a belt sander a few weeks ago. He was apparently super polite given the circumstances. Not a firefighter, but I am pretty sure a firefighter believed my call to be their stupidest. I suffered a stroke at a relatively young age which caused partial paralysis and severe weakness in my left arm that I still struggle with 4 years later. Anyway, around age 23 my face goes numb, droops, which makes my facial features symmetrical so it doesn't look off unless you know me. I was struggling to walk properly and talk so I called an ambulance. Firefighter arrives and asks me what the problem is. I am struggling to form proper sentences and think at all so I stutter my knee, your knee. What is wrong with your knee? I was trying to explain what was going on but she cut me off every time but I insisted I still wanted to go to the hospital. We get there and she rudely tells the staff that my knee hurts. But when she leaves, they let me stumble my words enough to explain my situation. I just remembered I was able to tell her that I thought I was having a stroke, but she just said young people don't have strokes. Volunteer firefighter. This story isn't as stupid as most others I have seen but we got a call for search and rescue. The call came out 30 minutes after dark. We got a general direction of north of redacted address, and that the callers were walking along a known trail and got lost. The trail is about 5 miles long. The day before we got heavy rain so it was all muddy and slippery. The 2 girls of young age, but old enough to hike on their own, diverted a quarter of a mile off of the trail, walked through a few inch deep stream and onto a small island. We found the 2. They said they'd been out for about an hour and a half. So 30 minutes before dark they started hiking, and they had flip-flops on with no traction. The part of the trail we went in, we had people slipping with heavily tractioned boots because of how steep and non-maintained the trail is. I'm still unsure how they made it that far in with all the mud and losing light. TLDR. Rescued 2 hikers that had very improper footwear for a muddy and steep trail and started the hike just before sundown and got lost. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.